Good evening. I'm Naomi Brickwell. I am the director of the Community Support Network here at Westchester Institute for Human Development, and I want to welcome all of you here tonight. And thank you, actually, for being here tonight to support our spring learning series. This whole program really began last spring and really was generated out of Facebook. I think many of you who are here tonight have been part of active parts of our Facebook discussions. This is really all the out of the brain of now my team member here at WIHD, Tara Klein. Last spring was in conversations with people on a Facebook post and ended up starting a Facebook group really targeted around adult issues. And out of that developed a learning series here at WIHD that was 3 sessions, was it last year? Yes. 3 sessions last spring, where we had over 100 people, 100 to 120 people registered, 100 people who would show up for these sessions on housing, issues related to housing. And one of the common, something that we heard a lot, and that I've heard a lot sitting in my office with some really expert people, including Michele Lawton here, and Karen Healy, who's our supervisor of self-direction services. And sometimes directly to me was that I would hear families saying, like, it's really great what you're doing, but my kid's never going to be that, or be able to do self-direction, or to be able to live in the community in that way, or whatever, or my child has such complex needs. So it was really a conversation that happened in room 106, which is our community support network, where I feel really, really blessed to be surrounded by just incredibly smart people, experts in the field of disability services from birth through adulthood. We have people that are really specialized in early childhood, early intervention, preschool, special education, and then now we've really, I think, expanded our technical assistance really to families navigating adult services. We have a very large self-direction services program, and I'm really just so thankful to Karen Healy for the work she's done to make that service available to people in the region. And now I'm really excited to have Michele Lawton as part of our team, helping families navigate residential services, as well as just adult services in general and benefits navigation. So welcome, and tonight is really another conversation generated out of Facebook. We have people here who are experts on navigating for housing options for kids with much more significant issues and needs, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to start just by introducing our panel, and then I'm going to give each of them a few minutes to come up and just talk a little bit about, take a few minutes to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with our kind of keynote draw here tonight, Susan Senator. Susan's an author, blogger, journalist, and educator living in Brookline, Massachusetts with her husband, Ned Batchelder. Sorry, I'm putting my glasses on.
Okay, no one gets that name right. That's why I kept my name.
She has 3 sons, the oldest of whom is 29 and has severe autism. Ms. Senator is the author of Making Peace with Autism, as well as the Autism Mom Survival Guide, and now Autism Adulthood, Insights and Creative Strategies for a Fulfilling Life. A journalist since 1997, she has published pieces on disability, parenting, and living happily in places like Psychology Today, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Exceptional Parent Magazine, NPR, Family Fun, and Education Week. Susan has appeared as a guest on the Today Show, MSNBC, ABC News, PBS, NPR, and CNN. Her writings on Special Olympics took her to the White House in 2006 to a state dinner for Eunice Kennedy Shriver. Really excited to have you here, so thank you. Next, second, I don't know, I'm just going in the order that I copied and pasted. So Patricia Newman is the program support psychologist and behavior analyst within Cardinal McCloskey's Developmental Disabilities Division. Within her current role, Trish provides oversight for all clinical and behavioral services for every individual enrolled in day programs, supported employment, or residing in any of CMCS's 18 IRAs. Trish started working with CMCS in 2013 and has been involved in managing waiver services for youth in foster care and the juvenile justice system, managing quality assurance for Bronx-based programs, conducting therapy for youth in emergency placement, and developing and maintaining ABA services across multiple divisions. Trish is also a certified behavior instructor for autism and is responsible for training all CMCS staff, direct support professionals, and alternate providers on ABA techniques based on board-approved curriculum. We also have Frank DiMaggio, has been working at supervised individual residential at IRAs with Cardinal McCloskey Community Services for 7 years. As a program coordinator, he has had direct oversight of 3 of the supervised IRAs, which house young adults on the autism spectrum. In all 3 homes, he and his teams of direct support professionals and clinical staff at CMCS focus on creating a person-centered approach in order to enhance and promote an independent lifestyle for residents. Frank's teams utilize behavioral supports and interventions, as well as teaching methods using an ABA model. He has gained the majority of his knowledge and experience with autism, residential homes, behavioral therapy, and working with the developmentally disabled population during his time at Cardinal McCloskey Community Services. He is also a BFT Level 1 certified behavioral instructor. And last but not least, and Michelle, because you're going last, I'm going to ask you then to speak first.
Ready?
Okay. Michele Lawton is a New York State housing navigator here at WIHD, consulting with individuals and families to create person-centered housing plans and supports, and overall long-term plans to meet their goals, needs, and desires. She has also just completed Cornell's Work Incentive Benefits Practitioner Certificate Series to provide benefits planning and navigation in the areas of SSI and SSDI, Medicaid, and Medicare. She is also a self-direction broker and well-versed in using self-direction as a tool for creating a non-certified independent living setting for individuals with disabilities. Michele is a strong and unwavering advocate for individualized services and supports for people with disabilities, being the mother, case manager, and advocate for the past 29 years for her son with severe autism, for whom she was instrumental in developing an adult integrated residential model which uses ABA as a teaching method for him and 4 other individuals with autism. She continues to help other individuals with autism and other disabilities find and create day and residential placements in which they can reach their potential and achieve their goals and dreams with joy and dignity. And I'm really excited that Michele's now doing that with us here at WIHD. Without further ado, Michele, if you don't mind starting us off tonight. So hello everyone, thank you for coming. I'm happy to be here. And I thought I would just tell you really just how I got here. I think that's most useful. I'm the mother of a 29-year-old individual with severe autism. So Jack had self-injurious behaviors. He hit his head on objects. He hit himself in the head. He was aggressive. He, when I first knew I would have to make other arrangements for him, was when he was 5. He put his head through a glass window, and I thought, okay, this is not going well. Just to be candid, he bit his sister in the face when he was 7. So I knew, okay, this is, we need to do something different for Jack. He's actually lovely. He's social. He's learning new skills. He's becoming more independent every day. But so back then, he was nonverbal. He did not speak. He did not point. He didn't imitate behavior. So we actually did, back then there weren't any school classes for kids with severe autism. And we taught him in our basement. We set up school in our basement. And I found out about applied behavior analysis by reading the book, Let Me Hear Your Voice. And they talked about LOVAS and discrete trials and applied behavior analysis and how
individuals with autism could learn to speak and could learn skills, independent skills, could learn how to imitate nonverbal and verbal behavior, and quote, recover. So we set up a program in our basement, found a consultant. It wasn't easy, and I had 40 hours a week, one-on-one training with 5 tutors. And it actually, but it works. He made progress. He learned to point. He learned to respond to commands, to sit, to put his hand on his head. I'll never forget, he learned to do puzzles. He learned to build blocks. He actually learned to imitate some verbal behavior. He learned to imitate nonverbal behavior. He learned to dress himself. He learned to toilet himself. So he made progress, and his behaviors were reduced somewhat, but not to the point where we could control it. So when he was 7, we knew when he was 5 or 6, we knew we had to do something. He was making progress, but it wasn't progress to the point where he was safe. It really was about safety. So he went to we found a school for him. He went to the New England Center for Children. He was there for 14 years. That's a structured applied behavior analysis program. It actually saved his life, I think. He was able to reduce his maladaptive behaviors, and it was long. It was 14 years. We worked really hard, but they use ABA as a teaching method. So again, he made progress. He learned to go out to the community. He learned to be independent, and his behaviors were, I'll give you an example. So when he first got there, he hit his head on objects about 300 times a day. So what they do is they baseline you, and they say, okay, what is the individual doing and why? So they really, it's about finding motivation to the behavior. So they figured out that the reason he was hitting himself in the head and having tantrums and being aggressive was because he was trying to escape from work. He was trying to escape from demands. So as soon as they implemented, and this took about 6 months to a functional assessment, when they figured out that was the reason for his behavior, they did a 2-person program where one person's sort of held, put his hands like this so that he couldn't engage in that behavior, safely. And then someone else on the other side would continue to feed him work. So he figured out that, well, if I engage in this behavior, I still have to work. So what's the point of engaging in the behavior? So he stopped. In about 2 weeks, his rates went down drastically. So that's just the sort of thing that ABA can do for a person. And when he was 20, I knew that he had to come back to New York State. They couldn't keep him at New England Center for Children. They don't have an adult program. And I thought, again, here I am again, now what am I going to do? For him, it was really safety. I needed a program that was going to use applied behavior analysis, and that was going to implement his behavior plan. He has a complicated behavior plan, or he did. He's no longer needs quite that complicated behavior plan. And I knew I would need that. And I knew that if I didn't create something or find something like that, he wasn't going to be safe. And he was going to end up really in a psych ward on meds, because he really needed that structured teaching method. So I was able, so it's about one of the things, I'll tell you there's 5 things that if you're going to do housing for your individual, you really need to think about. And one is you need a village. So, we were searching and talking to people, and, I would have coffee with people who had done housing in the past and searching for help. The OPWD as well, in the Department of Health. But one of my neighbors was a CFO of Catholic Charities. And he said, Michelle, I really think we can help you. I think we'd be interested in doing something like that in the adult world. And I said, wow, okay, so let's get a meeting. So he got me a meeting with the CEO, who still is Monsignor Sullivan. And we had a meeting, and we explained why we really needed this. It was really about the safety of my son and the ability for him to become independent and be integrated into the community instead of being sedated on meds and being babysat. And he said, okay, you need help, we'll help you. And actually that was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. Everything else had been a struggle, everything else had been, you advocate hugely. And we did advocate hugely. But he said, we'll help you. So that's when he introduced me to Beth Kennedy, who's the CEO of Cardinal McCloskey Community Services. And we started working on a plan. It was long. It took, I would say, 2 years. But we were able to partner. We were able to find a house. We actually, just for an example of a barrier that could be put into your place, we actually were in contract, had a house in Yorktown. And somehow someone politically got to the town, and at the town meeting, when we were discussing with neighbors what the house would be like, someone from the OPWD came in and said, I'm sorry, this project is not going forward. All the families were there, the staff, the administration was there, and they hadn't even been told that this was going to happen. So we were back to square zero, and we had to find a house. Again, we started over. I helped define the house. I probably looked at 80 houses, but we were able to find one in Ossining. We were able to get it done, and there are now, it started with 4 individuals. There's 2 girls and 2 men, and now we have 5. We added a 5th about a year after, 2 years after the program, and it's running beautifully. My son actually now has 0 maladaptive behaviors. His rates are 0. So the structured method and the ABA teaching, combined with a holistic approach, we look at meds. He has a great psychiatrist. You've added those together, and it's 7 years running now, but in 7 years, he's made tremendous progress. He's now going into the community, is now volunteering. He helps with landscaping. He cleans. He helps clean some of the houses at Cardinal McCloskey. He's able to interact. He's super social. He's able to learn now, because behaviors get in the way of learning. So if you can reduce the behaviors, learning blossoms. So what else can I tell you? I'm going to tell you my 5 things that you need to keep in mind. Number 1 is it takes a village. I had neighbors, friends, the New England Center for Children, teachers, babysitters, therapists. We had really a village help us do this. We did not do it alone. Cardinal McCloskey couldn't have done it without Cardinal McCloskey. They saved my son's life a 2nd time. And now, he's able to, really it was about safety for me. So 1 is it takes a village. You have to reach out. You have to find people to help you. I'm here to help you. WIHD is here to help you. Cardinal McCloskey is here to help you. Susan Senator is here to help you. You need to reach out and talk to people and get help. Number 2 is you're gonna have to do some financial planning, and we're gonna have a talk about that on June 12th. We're gonna have a financial planner come in, a wonderful financial planner who helps people with disabilities. You really have to start thinking about this early, and you have to think about financial planning because it does take some resources. It took us some resources, even with a certified setting. And if you want to do a non-certified setting, or you're gonna, you just need to have some skin and unfortunately money in the game sometimes. So think about that. It's financial planning for your individual and for your family. And another thing is it's not gonna be perfect. It wasn't perfect when we started. I have to tell you, the staff was kind of like deer in the headlights. We started at my house because the house wasn't ready yet, so I had 24/7 staff in my house. And we were, teaching. At first we were all working together and learning Jack, and, my husband and I were teaching, the staff about him and how to do things. And it was a work in progress, and we made strides, and 7 years later it's working pretty much like a machine, I think. And it has to be individualized. It has to be individualized to the person. There's no cookie cutter. So you have to look at the needs of your individual. The first thing you need to do is figure out what are the needs of my individual, what does he need to thrive and to learn to be independent. And don't take no for an answer. Just don't. You might have to make some compromises along the way, but don't let someone tell you you can't do something. So that's my spiel. If you have questions after, I'll be here, and we'll move it along to the next panelist.
Hello, everyone. So I know Michelle just mentioned in the beginning it was a bit tough in terms of staff starting off, as deer in the headlights. I could definitely relate to that. My first experience coming into this field, I had little knowledge, basically just from what I read in textbooks and from what I've seen on TV. my knowledge of autism was what I saw in the movie Rain Man. I didn't know the extent in terms of like self-injurious behavior, the levels of functioning, and a lot of the challenges that families face with children who have autism, and that you face in the field. So when I first started, I remember I went on the interview, I went through the process, and I was very intrigued because it was something I wanted to learn more about. And after my interview, it went well. They asked me to come for a site visit, so I came for the site visit, and it was the whole experience was a little strange for me. It was definitely different. I arrived at the home, knocked on the door, which was just a regular home in a regular neighborhood. So that was kind of a bit of a shock to me too, because essentially my first thought is like, okay, it's a facility for adults with autism, but it's not. It was truly a home, and to see that was kind of refreshing. So I walked in the door. I knocked on the door, and the staff answered and guided me downstairs to meet with the manager. After that, he took me on a tour around the house, and that's when it became overwhelming, and I really knew what I was stepping into. So, within 5 minutes of being there, I was already seeing individuals engage in self-injurious behavior. I was seeing a lot of maladaptive behaviors, and for me it was a shock. I had never seen anything like that. But what intrigued me the most about it was the staff at the house. While this was happening, they were very engaged, and they were so calm, and they were so relaxed working with the individuals, and that kind of blew me away, because it was like, me coming in there, like looking around, like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? But seeing how calm and confident the staff were and how welcoming they were, it really made me feel like this is something I want to learn more about. This is something I want to do. So it was funny too. One instance when I walked in the house, one of the individuals was walking and they introduced me, and I went to shake his hand, and he just looked at me and walked right by me, and it was kind of like, oh, okay. The staff smiled at me and was like, oh, you have a lot to learn, but you'll learn fast. So. It didn't take long. I mean, within 2 weeks of being in the house, I really felt like I was important. It wasn't just like, all right, you're in the house, go do the work, good luck. Literally every day, the manager was meeting with me, the staff were meeting with me, behavior therapists were coming in and out of the house every day, training me on behavior plans, in-servicing me on IPOPs, level of safety, safeguards. And I didn't actually work independently on the floor for the first 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, my manager came up to me and said, how do you feel? Do you feel comfortable to work with the individuals alone? Do you feel you're ready? And I said, yeah. And he says, okay, prove it. So that whole day, he shadowed me working with one of the individuals. If there was little things that I did wrong that weren't in accordance with the behavior plan, he would correct it and nip it right in the butt there. So that was great. I had, all the training and all the knowledge and all the support I needed when I first started. And coming into a job in any field, that's what you want. That's what you want to see. You want people to support you, because especially working in this field, it's very challenging. It's very difficult. Fast forward 7 years later, so I worked as a DSP for 4 years. And after 4 years, I decided, it was time to take a next step, and I wanted to give managing a shot. So the manager position had opened up. Our current manager was promoted. I went out for it. I applied, and I got the job. One thing that was so special about the house I started at, and I think it's key when it comes to residential alternatives and really forming a successful home, is that the families were very involved. And the families, it's one thing to be very involved, but it's one thing to be very involved in a supportive way. So one thing I could say is that the families always made you feel appreciated. We'd have frequent holiday parties. We'd have frequent barbecues. We would always be in constant communication with the parents. If there was an incident, they would be notified right away. Everybody would be on the same page. We'd have monthly clinicals so that, it was important for everybody to understand that not only what we're doing in the program is important, but it needs to be carried out through the homes. And the parents were on the same page, so a lot of the behavioral interventions we utilize, parents would have copies of the behavior plans. If there were instances where, things didn't go too smoothly at home on home visits, they would communicate that to us so we would know exactly what to expect when the individual was coming back. And everybody was always on the same page. And I think that's key when it comes to, having a successful home, making sure the communication is always there. And also, like I said, we were holding holiday parties, so it really set up like a family environment in the home. And that was something to me that was really special. And when I became manager, I felt a lot of pressure because the house was doing so well, and I didn't want to let the families down. I didn't want to let the house down. And a lot of people who have been working there for a long time were looking for somebody to kind of continue to lead the house in the right direction. So it turns out, we ended up being very successful. When I first started in the home, there were a lot of behavioral challenges. I mean, there were, behavioral interventions, reactive interventions that happened on a daily basis. And then, through the consistency and the implementation and all the staff being trained properly and thoroughly, we got to the point where you started to see these behaviors decrease little by little. So, daily occurrences were turned into weekly occurrences, and then weekly occurrences were turned into monthly occurrences. We had individuals in the home who, when I first got there, taking them to the grocery store was an issue. Even getting them in a van to go to the grocery store was an issue. And through the repetition, which is important because it's easy when an individual engages in a maladaptive behavior to just say, okay, well, clearly he doesn't want to do this, let's try something else. But sometimes there's other things at play, right? Whether it's sensory, whether it's medical, and that's where, understanding and having that training to recognize what the behavior means and how to create a plan to address it is important. So, after going through all these, challenges with the individuals, those same individuals who, had trouble just even able to get in the car to go to a store, go to the store and successfully wait in line for something to purchase, those same guys now are going to Broadway plays in New York City. They're going on weekend vacations and overnight stays, and it's working out great. So I think with me personally, because it is a field that comes with a lot of challenges and it comes with a lot of stress, but what personally keeps me going and keeps me happy is the fact that I made a difference in these individuals' lives, and that's something that I can be really proud of because I could see it. Being there 7 years, it's like, okay, I started here, now I'm at this point where I don't need to be in a way like micromanaging because I know my staff can handle the individuals accordingly, and they have the best interests. So that's kind of sums up the management part. So you fast forward a couple of years now being a program coordinator, which has by far been my biggest challenge since I've been working in this field. So as a program coordinator, my responsibility is essentially, it's like a super manager. So I'm managing, I'm not directly managing, but I'm overseeing 3 managers for 3 different sites, all with individuals on the autism spectrum, from the ages of 25 to 29, I think is our oldest. So that's tough too, because I know the success I've had as a manager with one home, but not every home is the same. Every home's different. There's different individuals, there's different dynamics, there's different history, there's different families. So trying to implement that model, which I've learned at one home, that's the challenge in terms of getting other houses on board and getting them to where they need to be. Also, this is a field where there's a lot of turnover. It's no secret that DSPs or ex-support professionals have low wages. So finding incentive to get staff to stay and getting them to really buy into the program too is a challenge that I frequently face as well. But so far it's been successful. Obviously things always arise, but with the training and support that we have in the agency, it's vital that we do what we can to make them better. I guess that's pretty much it. I will say in terms of having an IRA, just with my experience, it is very key, like I said, that the family and the agency always work together. The families always want something specifically, and sometimes agencies have to work within OPWDD regs and rules and regulations and guidelines. So, stuff that should be so simple sometimes isn't always so simple, and it's a process. So I think having patience is key as well. And the frequent communication is very important, just to ensure that everybody's best interests are for the individual. So that's pretty much in a nutshell my experience.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Is this good? So my name is Trish Newman. I am the Program Support Psychologist and Behavior Analyst for Cardinal McCloskey Community Services. I've been with the agency since 2013, and more recently in 2015, I transitioned up to our DD Services Department. Prior to that, I was down in the Bronx, and I was overseeing the mental health and emotional health supports for individuals in foster care, and also our clients that were coming out of the juvenile justice system. So fast forward to 2015, I moved out of the Bronx and up to Westchester, and I found myself in a role where I was completing behavioral analyses and writing plans and running clinical meetings and collaborating with families and practitioners and program planning teams, and literally, you name it, I probably have their cell phone written on a Post-it on my desk, and I probably talked to them a million times. But that's the beauty of DD services, is the collaboration that comes along with it, and that's absolutely critical. In my role right now, I do a little bit more than writing behavior plans and training staff. I'm also involved with the CMCS Human Rights Committee. So I monitor the implementation of any rights restrictions, whether environmental or through prescription medication or any physical interventions, that kind of thing. I'm also highly involved in the screening process and the referral and intake process, the development of new IRAs. Currently we're expanding. We just purchased a building in Austin, New York, which will be an additional day hub program, so that'll be our fourth day program, and that one is vocation-based, which is great. So yeah, everybody in that program is going to sort of transition to our supportive employment services. In addition to those things, I do a lot with incident management. Currently consulting with 2 outside agencies on the development of their ABA-based programming, both in day services and also in residential services. And there's a lot more work to be done. So we find ourselves very, very busy, that's for sure. So I'm not necessarily as interesting as Frank and Michele are by any means. I started in this field definitely off the books, but probably when I was a little younger than typical age to work. So I started at 12 years old, and I was assisting a family friend, and I was coaching individuals with Down syndrome and autism in gymnastics. Then I assisted another family friend, and I nannied for her daughter, who I found out about 10 years later had autism. I had no idea. She loved me, and that was probably one of my all-time favorite experiences. So once I found out, and I was like, now I'm in my 20s. Now I understand what that is, and isn't that incredible that I had such an early experience with that? So, I mean, that's like my early years. They're pretty bland, but it was incredible stuff. After college, I started working with a nonprofit organization over in Rockland County, where I was the program director for residential services. It was based out of a school, and I coordinated all of the recreational services for children with developmental disabilities during the after-school hours, and I also coordinated and organized respite opportunities during the summer. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of my experience, but I know that a lot of what we do is very pertinent to the discussion that everybody really wants to have here tonight. It's less about my history and more about sort of what are we doing. So I just wanted to share some information with everybody that might help inform and educate, and also perhaps spark some interest and additional discussion moving forward. So if that's okay, I'll move to the PowerPoint. Yay. Okay. So, Cardinal McCloskey, that's us. Transitioning to adult residential services. So I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about this, and it really depends on sort of our audience members and the level of interest in the actual transition process. However, there are some very important things that we need to consider when we're transitioning. And the transition to adult residential services can come from children's residential services or community-based services. Community-based services can be anything from living at home with family, or potentially being homeless, or even being in an institutionalized setting. So what we found over time is that individuals with autism spectrum disorder and significant behavioral challenges tend to get diagnostic priority over some of the other individuals that are being referred for services. Sometimes that also comes with additional funding. No promises, All I'm saying is that it's a possibility. One of the things that always concerns all of the team members involved is what we call the metaphorical cliff. The metaphorical cliff is really once structured services are interrupted in order to allow for a transition to take place, and then all of a sudden that person finds himself in a new environment receiving newer structured services. That disruption in service provision can really have a very significant impact on the individual's ability to sort of maintain any behavioral regulation that they've learned over time, and oftentimes we see regression. So that's something very significant to consider, because once we are planning for transition, we want that transition to happen very quickly, but also in a very planned out and structured way. In terms of regional accessibility in New York, there's not much when it comes to ABA programming. And while I don't want this to be a sales pitch for Cardinal McCloskey by any means, I do know that the services that we have in place in terms of residential are really profound when it comes to adult residential. We were actually the first nonprofit organization in New York State to open up adult ABA residential services. That was in 2011. That's the Locust Road IRA. That's the one that Frank works at. And since that time, we've actually opened up 2 additional ABA-based adult homes. So I have some information here on the transition process. Show of hands, who's interested in the transition process? Okay, good. So I'm glad that I put this on here. So the first thing that typically happens is that eligibility is determined by OPWDD, and then that person's eligibility and supportive documentation kind of gets sent off to the state, and that person is prioritized on what we call a CROW list. That CROW list has P1, P2, and P3. P3 is the most immediate placement need. Those packets of information and also that list are sent out to nonprofit organizations, and those organizations have to look at the P3, the most immediate need first, followed by P2, followed by P1. Excuse me. So then what happens is the nonprofit organization has a team together. They do a preliminary review of some of the documentation that that coincides with that person's packet. Then we'll request more information, and then we'll go out and see the person. And then we'll request more information, and then we'll see them again, and then we'll request some more information, and then maybe we'll see them again, and then request more information, and so on, and so on, and so on. After a while, and after we feel like we know almost everything that there is to know, our team will do a formal review of that documentation and of all of the observations and notes that have been taken, and we'll bring that back to our admissions committee. And if we have vacancies available, then we can move forward with enrollment. If there are no vacancies available at that time, if we're doing something like developing a new adult IRA, or if we are anticipating that a vacancy will open up, then of course we'll maintain contact over time, and that contact will not just be with the individual, it's going to be with their family members and also other members of their support network. Once that vacancy does exist, we'll do a trial transition where that individual will come to the group home, they'll visit for dinner, then we'll move to like overnight visits and then weekend visits, and then eventually we'll get to a point where they are transitioning from the house after an overnight or an extended stay back to their day program, for example, so that we can really see how they're doing in a shaping kind of procedure. We will train the staff, then we will enroll the person, and then we will continue to train and modify and train and modify. Good? Okay. So there's a lot of information on this slide, but really the purpose of this slide is to sort of inform everybody of some of the differences in terms of the placements that our guys come from, right? So CRS is Children's Residential Services, CBS is Community-Based Services, and ARS is us, Adult Residential Services. So oftentimes we see that there are different things that are guiding what skills are being focused on for development. We are seeing different levels of supervision. We're seeing the rule governance change So sometimes it's environmentally based, sometimes it's general, sometimes it's determined by families or institutionalized rules. In terms of the structure, we see very different approaches. Sometimes there is no ABA structure or PBIS, that's positive behavior intervention supports, in place. Most often those exist when somebody's coming from children's residential services or a school setting. And then the goals are very different in each of these placements. So in children's residential, we see the goal for that individual as graduation from that particular place, and placement potentially in adult residential services, if not supportive housing. And then in adult residential services, this is supposed to be a lifelong placement. We're hoping to keep them and for them to love it and be happy and be eager to live as long as possible in that setting until, of course, you know, the family moves and all of a sudden that person wants to move to be closer to the family or whatever the case may be. So continuity of services, much like I was speaking about before with the metaphorical cliff, this is absolutely critical. And there's some things that we need to consider with this. We need to consider somebody's learning history, right? All behavior is learned. And in order to really understand why somebody is the way that they are today and how we can develop supports to make sure that that person can be successful, we need to understand what they've learned in the past, how they've learned it, and sort of what is the function of all of the things that they're doing, okay? We need to teach new skills and establish new repertoires. And we also really need to establish what is socially significant to that person. You know, sometimes it's not necessary to put a goal in place to sort colors. Why, right? Is that important to the person? Is it something that's gonna help them gain vocational placement in the future? If it is, then great. But if it's not, we really need to reassess and make sure that what we're doing is important to that person and their support network. Cardinal McCloskey operates through the lens of person-centered planning. That means that we always consider the individual's perspective and what's important to them, as well as their families. And that individual has rights, always. They always have rights. Even if they can't advocate for them vocally or verbally, they always have rights. So we as an agency are considered their advocates. They also have a very strong team of advocates behind them, and we're all working towards the same goals. The provider networks are critical. We want to make sure that there's strong support for that individual. These are things like primary care physicians, psychiatrists, neurologists, so on and so forth. And then we also have compliance standards as a nonprofit organization. Those speak to things like community inclusion, person-centered planning, and also some of our billing standards. So at Cardinal McCloskey, we really focus on enhancing the supports that we provide to that person, and those supports are offered through teaching methodologies and behavioral interventions, but really ABA is sort of that golden thread that weaves through absolutely everything in that person's life. Frank had mentioned that those supports go home with the person. We share behavior plans with the families. Some of the families even take data for us, which is fantastic when you're a data nerd like I am. I like to see what that person is doing across all environments, and that's really fantastic. We are always considering sensory integration, and again, the person-centered approach. And also, we conduct competency-based trainings. So much like our individuals receive ABA services to support skills development and behavioral management, I use ABA when I'm training my staff. So that includes pre- and post-test measures and also database decision-making. So those testing measures will guide what additional trainings that I develop for my staff. And then there's a lot of outcomes, right? If ABA is effective, we're seeing individual outcomes, of course, and those are absolutely critical and they're measurable and wonderful. But we're also seeing division-wide outcomes. So we can compare some of the data between our IRAs and IRAs to group homes and also some of our different regions. We're seeing agency-wide outcomes and then, of course, system-wide outcomes. If we are effective in doing what we're doing, well, then maybe we can help some other agencies do this stuff too. So ABA at CMCS, I know that myself, Frank, and Michelle all kind of spoke a little bit to the Locust Road IRA, but here it is. It's a beautiful home. And those are our guys over there. So Locust Road opened up in 2011. I know Frank gave you a lot of the background on that house, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into that. But there were a lot of challenges, definitely, from the neighbors to how many staff have cars and where are they going to park and what about when the plows come by and who's taking out the garbage, because 5 individuals and like 4 staff in the house, they create a lot of garbage, right? So there was definitely a lot of considerations and a lot of supports that were needed for successful transition of our individuals from Children's Residential Services into the IRA, and also training supports for staff so that they could really run ABA models with integrity and the fidelity that we want to see with that approach. And that's it.
Okay, hi, I'm really happy to be here. As Tara said, I'm the mom of a 29-year-old with severe autism. I don't like saying severe autism because it's so subjective, but these days it feels pretty severe. But I also want to mention I have 2 other sons who are supposedly typical, and they're younger and they're out in the world. But so is my older guy, Nat. So I guess Nat is my sort of my golden standard. He's the one that I write about, and the other 2 don't let me write about them. And I'm getting to the point where I think maybe Nat doesn't want me to either, but that remains to be seen. I guess since we're talking about housing and transition and stuff like that, our story of transition kind of begins at about age 16, even though in my school system, which is supposed to be one of the best in the country, Brookline, Mass, we really didn't hear about how Nat should be working on transition. In fact, it was my state agency person who told the team, this is what we should be doing. And I guess you have OP, WDD, we have DDS, so it's the same thing. At 16, though, Nat started to really develop a lot of more difficult behaviors than we had been, dealing with before that. And so what happened was, after about a year of that, when my youngest, who's 8 years younger, was fairly terrorized by what was going on, even though, like Michelle, my oldest son is a very sweet person, lovely to be around, but there's these moments he has, and these peaks and troughs of difficult behavior. So that one lasted for a year, and we decided to pursue moving him into the residential program at his school, which is sort of like the cousin to the school that Michelle's guy went to. My son went to the May Institute. It's the other behavioral school in Mass. And so I had a year where I could sort of begin to prepare for him moving out. And I think that's one of the really important things to think about here, because everybody gets really scared of the whole moving out thing. And I really was afraid that, first of all, I was afraid that I was abandoning him. That going residential is like the last thing you do, and it's the worst thing, and people don't talk about it, and it's, it's really hard to operate as a parent under that kind of stigma. So I guess, first of all, I want to say that to the degree that you can, try not to take that on, and to stay focused on your guy and your family, because that's really where the truth is. And it really was a lot of my talking to myself about how this is what he needs, even though it looks like a bad thing. So what I did to prepare, aside from a lot of crying and talking and writing, I found out where the house was, where the residence was for his school. They're scattered throughout the neighborhood around the school building. And I just kind of drove in, and I kind of was looking at the house, and a young man comes out, about 35 years old, and he's putting out some trash, and I got out of the car and I said, "So is this a group home?" I was being very sly. And he said, "You must be Nat's mom." So, I mean, that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's what's happened. I get kind of a reputation because I get really obsessed with how is he going to be doing and how is he going to be taken care of. But the fact that that guy, made that connection with me and that joke made me feel like this is going to be okay. Sometimes it's just a moment like that where you get the vibe of the place and you realize it's going to be okay. Other times, in his life from 17 to now, 29, there's just been a lot of my realizing that some things that don't look good actually are, and that I tend to get fooled by the description on paper of something. And I also set a lot of store by my own vision for what Nat should have and should be. And I believe that I base that on who he is, but sometimes I really think, I'm beginning to learn, that some of that is my ego, and I need to separate that out. I've been thinking since he was 18 or so, I want him to live nearby in this cute part of Boston that's really close to my town, where he can just walk to the ice cream store and all this stuff. Want him to live with friends, but by friends I meant people he knew through Special Olympics who weren't necessarily difficult people with challenging autism. They were better role models. So again, I was kind of like believing this whole thing was necessary. That Nat had to have that kind of life because it looked good in my head. And really, the two times that we've come close to that vision, the placement's fallen apart. So, and that's happened for many reasons, but the thing that I'm really starting to learn is that I really don't always know what's good for him. I know a lot, but I don't always know everything. And so you have to have good people on your team and people that you also cultivate in the community. Like what Michele was saying, I think you need to find your gurus, people who will, let you buy them a cup of coffee, you sit down in Starbucks for an hour and you take notes. And then you have to meet with them again, like a month later because you forgot everything that they said. So there's this kind of like putting time in, but giving yourself a break too, because you can't always do it. Going to the conferences, go to these kinds of things, but if you just can't sometimes, because you just don't want to think about it, you don't have to. You have to kind of live within your own reality, and you have to do it in your own way and at your own pace, or it's not going to work. The thing I've learned, though, is that I do too much at my own pace and in my own vision and stuff that I miss out sometimes on what the professionals actually can offer. So I've come into this late in the game, respecting the people who are working really hard at creating the group homes and not thinking that I know everything. I guess what I'm saying is this adulthood thing has really humbled me. I did write a book 2 years ago, and I started to feel like, and don't tell my publisher I said this, but I started to feel like I should have waited, because I'm still learning, and sometimes I feel like I'm an example of what not to do, because we just keep on. A lot of it's been trial and error with Nat's adulthood. He's had 2 shared living experiences and he's had 3 group homes, so that's a lot in 7 years. and I'm not gonna, just blame myself, but, things have happened and he's a complicated guy. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you need to be able to work with the people on your team. You need to be able to make some connection somewhere on your team or in your community. Get someone who will be in your corner, who kind of knows the ropes. But you also really need to try to listen to the other people at the table as well. You have to have confidence, because maybe you don't feel like you know what to do in adulthood. You have to have confidence, but you also have to be able to listen to the other people. And you have to be humble, unfortunately, and kind of realize what you don't know. I don't know, you're shaking your head, but maybe.
I think it's funny. Humble, unfortunately, yes. It's funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's hilarious. Yeah, I know. But I've had to learn that, to give myself a break, because I'm making mistakes, but then to get back in when I can, So now we're at a point where he's been living at home with us again for 3 months, and it's getting difficult. He's been hitting his head a lot. And a group home has opened up, and it's with an agency that I had a problem with before. And we sat down together at the table, and I said to the person in charge, okay, go ahead and say it, I told you so. And so I got them laughing, and so things were more relaxed as we went into the meeting. And I realized that, that agency, they're real control freaks. And that's the thing that I butted heads with them about before, but now I realize maybe that's the thing that's going to really keep Nat safe. Because if that woman, the director of the program, was at my meeting telling me what the house is like that they want Nat to go into, she's everywhere. And the people are kind of afraid of her. She founded the place, and she's been there for like 40 years. And I just felt suddenly like, as annoying as that kind of thing might be, maybe I've landed in a place where he can stay. And I realize that that's actually more my goal now. I want him to stay there, and it's not because other stuff didn't work out. It's because I think that now I've kind of learned that it's okay to let other people help us out, and that I don't know everything. So I guess that's what that would be my message today. And now I guess we can just talk. Thank you.